Way back in the 20th century, lost in the mists of time, my 11th grade English lit teacher, Miss Donna Mae Cooey, taught us three things. And she wrote these on the board the very first day, said if you take nothing else from this class, understand these three things. The first, Britain is an island. The second, all art is suggestion. And the third, and this was probably the most important, in case of an actual fire alarm, she would trample any and all of us if necessary in order to be the first one out of the building. Today we're going to be taking a look at the second of these three tenets, all art is suggestion, and how that relates to what I see as a central paragraph in Flaubert's Madame Bovary. Ms. Cooey, let's hop into it. Heyo, Stunt Reader here. The aim of this channel is to help you level up your craft as a novelist by learning to actively read novels, in your genre and out, both classic and contemporary, to figure out what it is about these stories that makes them so emotionally compelling to so many people. If that's of interest to you, please subscribe and ding that notification bell so you'll be sure to know when I upload my next video. Active reading is one of the easiest and most reliable ways to take your writing skills to the next level. So let's get reading. So the paragraph we're going to be taking a look at today is from Part 2, Chapter 9 of Madame Bovary. This chapter is central. This is the point of no return. This is the chapter in which Rodolphe, who has been courting Emma, finally gets her to relent, and they consummate the affair, or to be less coy about it, they have sex. And this paragraph is the sex scene. In essence, it is all through suggestion. Flaubert had to be very wary of prosecution for obscenity, and even with, as you'll see, it's a very suggestive only scene. There's nothing explicit about it. And it's one of only two scenes, the other one similarly suggestive. And even so, he was prosecuted for obscenity, ultimately acquitted, but this was a constraint against which he had to work and which caused him to resort to suggestion, I think to the benefit of the book. Let's take a look at it. Evening shadows were falling, and the level rays of the sun streamed through the branches and dazzled her eyes. Here and there, all about her, among the leaves and on the ground, were shimmering patches of light, as though hummingbirds winging by had scattered their feathers. All was silent. A soft sweetness seemed to be seeping from the trees. She felt her heart beating again and her blood flowing in her flesh like a river of milk. Then, from far off, beyond the woods and distant hills, she heard a vague, long, drawn-out cry, a sound that lingered, and she listened silently as it mingled like a strain of music with the last vibrations of her quivering nerves. Rodolphe, a cigar between his teeth, was mending a broken bridle with his penknife. But the sentence right before this is, just to give a little context, she leaned back her head, her white throat swelled in a sigh, and, her resistance gone, weeping, hiding her face, with a long shudder, she gave herself to him. So that, you could argue, is the actual moment in which she surrenders. And then this is the aftermath. Evening shadows were falling, and the level rays of the sun streamed through the branches and dazzled her eyes. The level rays suggesting horizontal, that she is possibly also on the ground, which is borne out in the next sentence. Here and there, all about her, among the leaves and on the ground, were shimmering patches of light. So surrounding her on the ground, shimmering patches of light, she's lying on the ground, as though hummingbirds winging by had scattered their feathers being soft, and so these patches of light are also sort of soft. The ground is soft, and this is borne out again in the next sentence. All was silent, a soft sweetness seemed to be seeping from the trees, and then that sense of seeping now, of flow, starts to come in. She felt her, which continues into the next half of that sentence, she felt her heart beating again and her blood flowing in her flesh like a river of milk. Blood, of course, very evocative. She's not a virgin at this point by any stretch. She does have a daughter, but this is in essence her losing her virginity a second time. This is her first time having sex with a man other than her husband, and she certainly hasn't had sex with her husband very often. I'd be surprised if it was more than the one time that was required in order to have their child. And then the river of milk, also very suggestive, evocative of semen. So moving from flow now into the sound, from far off beyond the woods and distant hills, a vague, long, drawn-out cry, which I think is very evocative of an orgasm cry. A sound that lingered. Now, and she listens silently as it mingled like a strain of music, so that implies that it's not Emma that has made this cry, or even Rodolphe, that it is coming from far away, but I think it's evocative of the sounds that they make in the throes of passion. And she's listening silently with the last vibrations of her quivering nerves. I think it almost like she's listening to it in her head as it's echoing, that the drawn out, it sound that lingered. And so it's echoing with the last vibrations of her quivering nerves. This to me reads as though was either Rodolphe or her who made this cry, and that is mingling with her quivering nerves. And then this, now that I've started doing some video editing, this is almost like an L cut, where the sound from one scene carries over into the visuals cut, but the sound underneath continues to make the transition smoother. Because this last sentence is a bit jarring. It suddenly switches to Rodolphe. Rodolphe, a cigar between his teeth, was mending a broken bridle with his penknife. It's almost as though, she has finally returned to her senses, is able to open her eyes, is able to register the environment around her, looks around and for Rodolphe, and sees him already dressed, already working on fixing the bridle so that they can get home, because it is getting to be dark. And that sound, the drawn out cry, is still echoing in our ears as the visual cuts to Rodolphe. And I think that is a fantastically evocative paragraph. I'm obviously not the only one to think that. It's a pretty famous paragraph. This is the original, Flaubert's original French. My French isn't fantastic, but obviously, and Stiegmuller obviously, I think, has done a great job with translating this. This is the tricky part of looking at something in translation. You're never sure exactly how faithful it is to the original. I'll just leave it up here for a little bit in case you are fluent in French. You'll see he does one thing. Flaubert uses some semicolons, uses a lot of commas. Stiegmuller does do one thing. He adds a dash just to sort of help with our comprehension of this sentence or this phrase. And that dash really draws attention to that cry. I think appropriately, drawn out cry, a sound that lingered. It's possibly the most sensual part of the paragraph. This is just another translation I found online, Eleanor Marx Aveling's translation. And if you're reading that instead of the French, you can see that it's pretty similar to Stiegmuller's. A few different word choices here and there. Then far away beyond the wood on the other hills, she heard a vague, prolonged cry, a voice which lingered, and in silence she heard it mingling like music with the last pulsations of her throbbing nerves. It's really interesting how he uses the senses. Does not use all five senses, but does use three very prominently. You move from the visual in these first two sentences, her eyes being dazzled, shimmering patches of light. transitioning then into the tactile with the feathers and the softness that they imply, and that the next sentence is very tactile, is very her bodily sensations, that soft sweetness seeming to be seeping from the trees. She felt her heart beating again, her blood flowing in her flesh like a river of milk. So this is her sort of really experiencing her body. And then, so not exactly touch, but I would still call it tactile or body awareness. And then it moves into auditory, into her hearing, the vague, long, drawn-out cry, mingling like a strain of music, and also mingling with her bodily sensations, and then finally returning at the end to visual. So I think this is a fantastic paragraph to look at when it comes to description, when it comes to suggestion. And Madame Bovary is full of such paragraphs. Flaubert is an amazing writer. This was one of essentially two sex scenes. This was the consummation of the affair with Rodolphe. Later, at the beginning of part 3, after meeting with Léon again, who was her flirtation before Rodolphe, they too consummate their affair. And that makes for an equally suggestive, much funnier scene. She and Léon are essentially looking for a place where they can get it on. And so they hire a carriage, basically hire a taxi, close the curtains and tell the driver to drive on. And every time he asks them where they want to go, they keep telling him, just keep driving. Anywhere, said Léon, pushing Emma into the carriage. It's sort of from the coachman's point of view, because we're not allowed into the carriage with them, because then Flaubert would have to be more explicit about what's happening. So again, a good use of suggestion here. He couldn't conceive what locomotive frenzy was making these people persist in refusing to stop. He tried a few times, only to hear immediate angry exclamations from behind. He was past caring, demoralized, and almost weeping from thirst, fatigue, and despair. They just keep making the same circuitous route around Rouen. This is one of my favorite paragraphs of the book. Along the riverfront, amidst the trucks and the barrels, along the streets from the shelter of the guard posts, the bourgeois stared wide-eyed at this spectacle unheard of in the provinces. A carriage with drawn shades that kept appearing and reappearing, sealed tighter than a tomb, and tossing like a ship. Possibly the first occurrence of "if the carriage is a rockin', don't come a knockin'" in world literature. So two very suggestive scenes, two scenes that do a great job of using suggestion to convey the emotions, to convey the actions even that the characters are participating in and experiencing in those scenes. Have you read Madame Bovary? If not, are you intrigued? I highly recommend it. I'm telling you, you could look at just about any paragraph in this book as an example of great descriptive prose. Would love to hear from you in the comments. If you got some value out of this, please give a thumbs up. If you're interested in more of this kind of content, please subscribe and ding the notification bell so you'll be sure to know when I upload my next video. Till then, keep reading, keep writing.